Welcome back, everyone, to Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, presented by the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network. My name is Philip Nguyen. I'm one of the co-hosts of Accented, and what y'all just heard is our in-house DJ Puzzle. Just shout outs. How you doing, DJ Puzzle? Welcome back. Happy APA History Heritage Month.
Dude, for real. Ending it strong, doing it well. How about you? How you doing though, Philip?
I'm feeling good. But I'm gonna definitely be feeling better once we get started talking with some of these guests that we've got for today's episode of Accented, Writing Myself into Existence, Creating Reflections of Our Lived Experiences, where we'll have the opportunity to speak with Hanh Bui and Alexandra Huynh. So I'm pretty hyped about that. For those of y'all who are calling in on Zoom, please feel free to drop where you're calling in from tonight. Let us know what's for dinner or drinks, and share a memory with us. For those of y'all who this is your first Accented Dialogues in Diaspora show, it's presented by DVAN, or the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network. DVAN believes that the stories and aesthetics of a thriving Vietnamese diaspora can unite our global community in its mission to celebrate and foster diasporic Vietnamese literary voices. As refugees, immigrants, survivors, and their descendants, our complex and diverse stories must be heard, and DVAN aims to champion and pass these stories on to empower current and future generations. So as I'm talking about DVAN, you can learn more about our past, ongoing, and upcoming programs on Facebook and Instagram at weare_DVAN, or at the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network. You can also visit dvan.org. As we continue to emerge from the pandemic with fresh opportunities and ways to get involved and evolve, right? One of the best ways to get involved and evolve is DVAN offers writers residencies. For this fall 2023 season, the application submission deadline is coming up really quickly on May 31st. The DVAN Malay Arts New Author Residency, which takes place in the month of October 2023, is open to Vietnamese and Southeast Asian writers who've published their first book in the last 1 to 3 years. And for those of y'all who are still up and coming, the DVAN Luce Global Collective Residency for women and non-binary writers will bring together 6 to 7 diasporic Vietnamese and Southeast Asian writers who identify as female or non-binary in the first 2 weeks of December. So please make sure y'all check out dvan.org and sign up for our newsletter updates. Check out what's going on and what's upcoming so that you're the first to hear about all of these exciting opportunities and events that are hosted and co-hosted by DVAN, the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network, to get your diasporic literary community fix. Tonight's show, Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, to give y'all a little bit of background context, emerged as a way to provide this intimate space to facilitate collaboration, conversations, and connections between our community members across the Southeast Asian Vietnamese diaspora. We've brought together cultural producers to share their work, stories, passions, inspirations, and what they've been up to since the beginning of the pandemic and through today. Over 30, I think we're on our 34th or 35th show, and 2+ years later, now going on our 3rd year, we've kept it going with the support of so many of you who come each month to attend Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, to listen in on these conversations and to be a part of how we contribute to the culture. I also want to take a minute to thank our sponsors who have made this show possible day in and day out. The Serdna Foundation, which seeks to foster sustainable communities in the United States, communities guided by principles of social justice and distinguished by healthy environments, inclusive economies, and thriving cultures. As well as AppLovin, their leading marketing platform provides developers a powerful set of solutions to grow their mobile apps. AppLovin's technology platform enables developers to market, monetize, analyze, and publish their apps. They're headquartered in Palo Alto, California, with several offices globally, and you can learn more at applovin.com. For tonight's show, the format, just for those of y'all who don't know, we're going to be recording 2 separate episodes of this podcast radio show, podcast/virtual conversation for the radio, KPFA radio, where it'll be published on the airwaves. For this format, our 2 guests will have 2 separate conversations with me and my co-host, Viet Nguyen, who we'll introduce in a second. We'll have a short intermission in between where we'll do a little bit of transitioning. And at the end of both of their individual podcasts or radio episodes, we'll have about 15, 20 minutes where we'll be able to dive a little bit deeper and have a little bit more of an open-ended conversation with both of our guests tonight, Hanh Bui and Alexandra Huynh. So without further ado, I have the distinct honor of introducing Mr. Viet Nguyen, who is one of the co-founders of the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network and the author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Sympathizer, currently being adapted by HBO/Max into a television series for 2023. Its sequel, The Committed, the best-selling short story collection, The Refugees, and the children's book, Chicken of the Sea, which was co-written with his son, Ellison. So if y'all could please give him a virtual round of applause and a warm welcome, Mr. Viet.
Hey, Philip, it's so good to be back with you today to talk to our guest, Hanh Bui. Inspired by her first teacher at her first refugee camp, Hanh Bui pursued a master's degree in early childhood education and taught second grade. Han's commitment to celebrating her heritage includes giving presentations at school visits about her refugee experience to children studying immigration as part of their school curriculum. She is the author of The Yellow Ao Dai, published in April 2023, and the forthcoming Ang's New Word, forthcoming in June 2024. Han, so good to have you here with us.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Well, as I mentioned, you went to a refugee camp, and I just discovered that this refugee camp was my refugee camp, where I also was as well. That's such an amazing coincidence. Well, can you tell our audience what refugee camp that was?
It was Fort Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania, and we were both at the same camp. And you said your brother was probably around my age.
Well, I don't want to date you. I don't have a problem dating my brother. This is 1975. This is probably the summer of 1975. And, you know, obviously what happened was in April 1975, South Vietnam lost the war, and many tens of thousands of South Vietnamese had to flee the country as refugees. Your family and my family. And we ended up in Fort Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania. I was 4 years old. I think you were 8.
I was 8. Yeah.
So you were too cool to hang out with the 4-year-olds, is my assumption.
About that.
So I actually recently went back to Fort Indiantown Gap to see it because I didn't remember anything about the camp. But what do you remember about Fort Indiantown Gap?
I remember a lot of things about Fort Indiantown Gap. I remember that my family and I, the kids in my family, like my brothers and cousins and aunties, we were always like one of the first ones in line. We knew that we were served 3 meals a day, and it didn't matter where we were playing or what we were doing. We were always like the first kids in line. And there was no clocks to tell us the time, but we knew just from, you know, the sense coming from the mess hall. So I remember that, and I remember the teachers teaching us outside.
I am going to ask a dumb question because this is what concerns me as a writer, but what were they serving in the cafeteria?
Well, they were serving kind of like what they serve in colleges. So I actually had, I tried a lot of American foods, and one of my favorites was spaghetti. But I remember just my grandparents weren't sure about noodles with red sauce, but us kids, we loved it. And one of my favorite things was getting to try chocolate ice cream and vanilla ice cream in a cup with a wooden spoon. I thought that was so amazing to have 2 flavors. So I still remember that.
I think for kids, obviously, going to a refugee camp is a little bit like going to summer camp. You know, everything's new, everything's fun, you have no responsibilities, and you get this great food, and you have no chores. I think for our parents, it was probably much more of a shock. Obviously, people have grown up Vietnamese, eating Vietnamese food their entire lives, and they have to eat spaghetti.
I know.
Imagine like steamed green beans or just like
and mashed potatoes and like shepherd's pie. Yeah.
Oh my God, very, very alien things. But this was for our generation, probably the portal towards Americanization. Now, did you speak any English when you got there at 8 years of age?
No, I did not speak any English at all. So I learned my first English words at the refugee camp because they had teachers that came. They had volunteers that taught us English. And so once we settled, everybody had to go to school. All the kids had to go to school, and the grown-ups even had to go to school. And they had adult English classes as well. So I remember going to school with my family, my cousins and relatives who were at school age. And it was really fun to go to school because I felt like it was a sense of normalcy after being on the ship and coming to America. It was nice to be able to go to school. And I remember the MPs who lived among us would come around and actually gather all the children, make sure we went to school.
MP, military police. How
Yes,
nice.
the military police lived with us. And I remember they would make sure that the kids got to school every day. And so they would go around to all the barracks and make sure we went to school, so you couldn't skip school.
I visited the barracks actually, and again, I had no memory of it. So it was really interesting stepping inside these military barracks, which were built in the 1930s, and they were marked with a T for temporary. 40 years later, they were still there.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting because if you ever seen war movies, World War II movies, and you've seen the barracks, they look exactly like that. Probably more crowded because I was told that the camp put in twice as many refugees as they would put in soldiers into these barracks. And I went and I looked at there's one bathroom in each barrack, and it's like there's no stalls, and the showers were dark with no light and no windows. Yeah, and I was like, wow. I mean, how did our parents cope with this transition? Again, for kids, being in a barracks was probably a lot of fun. Adults,
I think coming from the conditions of being on the ship and being at the refugee camp was a big improvement. So I think that helped us all to just be so grateful to be able to have a bed to sleep on and all that.
Now, your first children's book is called The Yellow Ao Dai.
Yes.
And I'm wondering whether you remember whether any of the refugees had brought ao dai with them from Vietnam.
They did. My grandmother brought some ao dais with her as well. And I remember that because it was actually really wonderful that the people who were there volunteering to help us and the government that set up the camp for us, they actually had a special day where they actually sometimes there were singers and performers living with us. And so they would actually have them put on their traditional clothes, and we got to watch and listen to traditional songs and performances with people wearing ao dais. Because I think a lot of, especially the grown-ups, my grandparents and a lot of parents were very homesick. And so they actually put on special shows for us and let us hear music in the Vietnamese language. And so I think that was such a kind and thoughtful thing to do for the people that were there. And I remember that it meant a lot to my grandparents to be able to hear music from their homeland. So I still remember that. I still remember people wearing ao dais, and we had a great auntie who left before us. And I remember she took out her fancy ao dai and wore it the day that her family was sponsored. And she even had big sunglasses that she got from the refugee camp store. And I said she looked like a movie star, because she was excited to be able to leave the camp and have their first home. And so I think a lot of people save the ao dais for special occasions like that.
Have you been able to save your grandmother's ao dai, even through today?
No, I don't have any of my grandmother's ao dai. It went to my aunties. So, she has some that she wore so many years, but my aunties kept them as mementos. I do have ao dais are passed down from my husband's mom, and that's my mother-in-law. And this story is inspired by her and my daughter. So I do have ao dais from my mother-in-law that I kept.
Thanks so much for that, Han. And before we get a little bit deeper into the story, for some of our listeners who may not know what an ao dai is, would you mind describing what it is or the symbolism behind the ao dai?
Well, the ao dai is our national traditional Vietnamese dress, and it's been around for hundreds of years, and it's worn for special occasions, but it's also worn for schools. When you go to school, I remember as a schoolgirl, you have to wear kind of just the white traditional ones. You don't have fancy ones, but for weddings, you would wear red, and the bride would wear red and even special headpiece. And so I remember wearing that for my wedding dress as well for the dinner reception. And then we also have ao dais made for all different special occasions. Like my mother-in-law had so many ao dais made, and they would have embroidery and some would have art. So they're almost like blank canvases for really beautiful artwork and a way to express yourself. So I think for many people, it's an extension of themselves and their creativity and what they love. And so my mother-in-law loved flowers, so a lot of her ao dais had flowers and beautiful drawings on them. So I really think it depends on what it is that you're passionate about. A lot of times that's a way of expressing yourself.
And I know I have a couple of friends who like get their ao dais custom made like in Vietnam and then shipped over, or they'll go and they'll get fitted and they'll come back with like 10, 20 of them, like literally 10 or 20 of them.
Yeah. And they change a lot.
Yeah.
Now, like there's different necklines and stuff. So the modern ao dais look very different than when I was growing up.
So tonight's title, and you, for the folks listening out there, this is Philip Nguyen. I'm here with my co-host Viet Nguyen for Accented Dialogues in Diaspora. We're speaking with Hanh Bui, the children's book author. Tonight's episode is titled Writing Myself into Existence. Han, I want to ask you, why was it important for you to use the ao dai and the heritage and the history imbued in it as a way to share the story for a younger generation, right?
Yes. Well, I know that my daughter, her friends, none of them have ever heard of an ao dai. And when I was a teacher, I never saw a book that had an ao dai in it or a Vietnamese child in it. And then when I became a writer, I'm so grateful that there's more children's books now that are written by marginalized writers and diverse authors. But there still wasn't a book that showed a lot of our culture. And I really wanted to share the ao dai because my daughter grew up loving to dress up as like princesses. And I remember my mother-in-law shared me in her 70s. She shared with me that when she was a young schoolgirl, she was crowned Mid-Autumn Princess. And my daughter was 18 months old when her grandmother passed away. So she never had a chance to know her grandmother. And she always felt like that was something that was missing in her life because we would go to Grandparents' Day at school and she didn't have a grandmother. And so when one day I saw her looking inside my closet and she was looking at the ao dais, and my daughter's favorite color is yellow, just like her grandmother. And I thought this was an opportunity for me not to only introduce it to my daughter, but introduce it to a generation of children who have never heard of ao dais, and learn about fan dances and Mid-Autumn Princesses. And so I felt like it was a way for me to honor both my mother-in-law, but also to show my daughter that even when she's not with her grandmother anymore, like her grandmother's not here, she can always still connect with her through those special memories and keepsakes.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Han. You know, since we're on the radio, we don't have a chance to really see some of the designs that you are in the yellow ao dai, right? Of course, a yellow ao dai is featured throughout, but there are also different multicolored ones, as well as other symbols that evoke a sense of like Vietnamese or Vietnamese Americanness too, right? Such as the lotus flower, butterflies, frogs, and other types of flowers. Would you mind speaking to those other symbols and how they're a way to retain this heritage?
Well, I really wanted to have the lotus flower in there because it's one of my favorites, and it's also our national flower for Vietnamese people. And I also love the fact that the lotus flower represents resilience, and I feel that's very much a part of our history as people. And so I really wanted to include that, and that's also an homage to my mother-in-law who loved flowers in all of her ao dais. And I wanted to include the frog because throughout my childhood, I always heard about how frogs are lucky. And I have also shared that with my daughter. So I thought it was fun to have, I think kids would be drawn to that, to know that frogs are lucky in our culture. And instead of having the tear be covered by another flower, I thought it was very childlike for a child to want to say, how about the frog? Because I'm always telling my daughter how frogs are lucky. So I wanted to include the frog. And then butterflies, I love the the imagery of butterflies taking flight and soaring. And that's how I feel about the main character in this book, is how she finds her courage to connect with her family history in order to find the bravery that she needed to be able to perform this special dance at the International Day. And I wanted to also share International Day because I felt like that's super important, because growing up, International Day was such an important day in my school, because it was a day that Vietnamese children and all the children from different cultures can share our heritage. And I know that a lot of schools are not having International Day, and I really wanted to bring that back. I felt it was really important because I remember growing up and thinking about how excited I was to be able to wear an ao dai on International Day and do the fan dance, and how my friends would gravitate towards me and ask all these questions about our culture and want to try our foods. And I thought that it was really important to bring that back.
Can you read an excerpt from the Yellow
Sure.
Owl?
Yes. Okay, I'll read an excerpt. So this part right here. So Nalia, so I'm just going to prepare a little bit backstory. So Nalia is getting ready for International Day, and she really wants to wear her special yellow ao dai, and that's where I'm going to pick up. Nalia had learned the fan dance from her mother, who had learned it from her mother. In Vietnam, Nalia's grandmother had led the fan dance at the Mid-Autumn Festival, which celebrates the end of the harvest season. Nalia knew exactly what to wear, her special ao dai. She had been waiting until now to practice in her fanciest dress, so it wouldn't be wrinkled for her performance. But when she tried it on, Nalia was dismayed to find it was too snug. She must have grown since she last wore it. Now, maybe Mom has one that I could use, she thought. Nalia tiptoed into her mom's room, where colorful ao dais cascaded from the closet like a hanging garden of flowers. She spotted a yellow one embroidered with swans and water lilies. Yellow, the color of happiness and forsythia blossoms.
That was beautiful. And if you're just tuning in, you heard children's book writer Hanh Bui reading from her new book, The Yellow Ao Dai, illustrated by Minnie Fan.
I want to show you just this page. That's Minnie's art.
Yeah. When we talk about the ao dai, people often think about the ao dai as something that women wear, but men wear it as well. So I'm going to make a confession here, which is that I have never worn an ao dai, even to my own wedding, because it's traditional, as you mentioned earlier, Han, for women to wear the ao dai now. Maybe less so for men, but historically, I think men have worn ao dai to their wedding as well. And the reason I didn't wear it is I asked my dad. I said, "Hey, Dad, do I have to wear an ao dai?" And he said, "No, you don't have to wear an ao dai." Okay, I was released from this traditional obligation, because I thought it was that kind of uncomfortable to wear, and I'm not really into that tradition. But is it comfortable to wear an ao dai?
I think because our dais are made to be quite snug, it isn't comfortable to wear like for every day. I like to wear it for special occasions. As a teacher, like when I was doing this book launch, I didn't want to wear an ao dai. I brought ao dais along so the children can see it, but because I wanted to be able to interact with the children, engage with them, I didn't wear an ao dai for my book launch. But I think now ao dais are made with more flexible fabric, so I think it depends on the ao dai that you choose. But I think there's way more choices now than before.
I think it's also important to note that for women, it's almost obligatory to wear an ao dai. In Vietnam, for example, if you're a teacher, you have to wear the ao dai every day. If you're going to a formal occasion and you're a woman, you almost are expected to wear the ao dai. Men can get away with it. We wear it when we want to wear it, so it's not an obligation. And so it's more of a, maybe it's less onerous for men in their relationship to the ao dai as well. Now, the book is illustrated by Minnie Fan, and which is another overlap that we have besides having refugee time together at Fort Indiantown Gap, because Minnie is the illustrator for a book that we're working on together called Simone. And it's really been an amazing experience for me to do this collaboration and to work on a children's book. So I guess the first thing is, how did you meet Minnie and how did this collaboration start for you?
So my editor actually introduced me to Minnie. She had chosen 3 Vietnamese illustrators, and she sent the art for me to look at. And I immediately connected with Minnie's art. And then they made the offer, and Minnie accepted. And right away, when the editor connected us, Minnie felt a connection to my manuscript. She had shared that she also had learned to sew from her mother, and also has a yellow ao dai. Because one of the things I wanted to honor in my book is the tradition of many women in our culture and girls knowing how to sew at a very young age, and also the idea of being able to reuse clothes and not just get rid of them when there's a tear. My mother-in-law and my grandmother would fix and repair clothes and would change them as their body changed, or even as they got older, they would make it so that it feels comfortable with them. And so they wouldn't just toss out ao dais, especially they only brought so many from Vietnam, so they were very special to them. I wanted to also honor that in the book, and Minnie connected with that immediately because she said that her mom had taught her how to sew, and that her mom also gave her a yellow ao dai.
And so how was the collaboration? Did you give Minnie the story, and then Minnie did everything, or did you go back and forth and you get back to Minnie on her illustrations?
Well, my editor gave Minnie the art, the manuscript, and then Minnie also had an art team. And so they together worked on the art, and Minnie kept the manuscript for several months and worked on the art, and then she would share it with my editor, and my editor would share it with me. But I really, besides being introduced, I really didn't have a lot of communication with Minnie why she was doing the art, because I wanted to really be respectful of leaving the space for Minnie to be able to interpret my story. And I wanted her to be able to bring to it her vision as well. And once we collaborated, I didn't see this anymore as my book. I saw it as our book, and it became our project together. And I trusted Minnie to feel the words because she said she connected with them. And when I received the art, I was just so blown away because Minnie had said to me in an email, she said, "Han, you've put so much love into the words. It's my turn to put love into the art." And that just right away put me at ease to know that my words went in good hands with Minnie.
Oh, that's amazing. I think especially with children's books, it's always, unless you yourself are the illustrator as the writer, it's always going to be a collaboration. It's always going to be our book versus my book. But on the my book part, I'm curious how you became a children's book writer. It's not exactly something that the average person is walking around thinking, I'm going to write a children's book, and then somehow they get it published. I mean, the process must be very mysterious to a lot of people. So what is your origin story as a children's book writer?
In 2018, I thought to myself, my children are getting a little older, but I don't want to go back to teaching because I really wanted to still be home for my 2 younger ones. So I thought, especially with everything that was happening in our country with the pandemic, and also with the rise in Asian hate and the different perspectives on immigrants and refugees, I just felt disheartened. And I thought there's something I can do about that, which is to share my immigrant and refugee stories and shine a light on those experiences, because I wanted children and readers to have a different narrative than what they're seeing in our world right now. And I felt like a lot of times what brings me hope is remembering the goodness of the people who helped me when I was a child. And so I wanted to really write stories inspired by that. I really wanted to write stories inspired by the helpers, and to show gratitude to my grandparents and our culture, and to celebrate that. And that's where it all started. And then I went to like an author event. I thought, if I'm going to become an author, I should go to an author event to see what it's like. So I went to a bookstore and attended my first author event, and it was Mary Wren Hess. She's a really amazing author. And I went there and I met her, and I thought, oh my God, she's so wonderful and warm and kind. So I thought, I think I do want to do this. And then I signed up and joined SEBWI and started taking classes at Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. I did that first, and then I started just drafting my letter, I started drafting my stories, and I knew that it would take a whole long process in order to become a traditional published author. So I started taking classes. I started taking classes with highlights, and I knew that my stories wouldn't be ready to share with an agent until I've had more time. So it took a while before I actually shared it with an agent, probably like half a year to a year before I actually felt like it was ready. And I really learned a lot about how difficult it is to write a picture book, because people think it's really easy, but there's so many revisions that happens before you feel like it's a complete story that's ready to be shared. So I think a lot of the process is realizing that it's not something that's going to happen quickly, and that it takes a lot of learning in order to become a writer. And I always knew I wanted to be a teacher first. But what's interesting is Viet, I actually wrote a story about my refugee experience when I was 13, and and I was actually featured in the Lancaster newspaper, and it was such a big deal to my family. But I still remember that, and the reason I felt so proud about that was because I had been an ESL student until I was in 6th grade. I still was going to ESL some of the time, so I felt so proud of myself to be able to write my first story, and for my teacher to feel my words and felt was worthy of being, featured. So
my own origins as a writer is when I was 8 years old in 3rd grade, and we had to write and draw our own book. And so that's what I did. I drew the pictures, I bound the book. And so that experience, is really powerful. And, you're talking about this early publication that you had, right? So I really do believe that, encouraging children to do these creative things, we just have no idea where that will lead eventually. It might take 20 or 30 years,
exactly.
for that child to become, an artist or not. It doesn't really matter. But this is, that planting of that early seed is so important and so empowering in a lot of ways.
And I think later when it grows, I mean, for me, you kind of shared when the first, or how you've never worn an ao dai. The first time I wore an ao dai was actually in Vietnamese Student Association, or VSA. And then later, as I continue to get involved in the diasporic Vietnamese community, going to a Tết Trung Thu or Mid-Autumn Festival, or going through that, being having not grown up in an ethnic enclave like Little Saigon, and not really knowing ever where to get an ao dai. My parents really didn't wear ao dai during the cultural festivals. Felt very isolating. And so I think for the little or the yellow ao dai, right, I really feel a sense of affirmation for now, when we go to as students, or as in VSA, we're able to kind of explore and explore these cultural artifacts, right? And I think because they're so much more accessible now, it's really amazing to be able to see ao dai even outside of just Vietnamese American ethnic enclaves, right?
Yes.
I know you were also a 2nd grade teacher, right, Han?
Yes.
And for this book, I also want to ask, is there a different meaning that's kind of taken away from the perspective of a young child versus the perspective of a parent,
Well, I think for children, a lot of kids I heard from mentioned that they were so glad that the mom wasn't angry at Nalia when the dress was ripped, because the mom remembers her own experience trying on the dress and also tearing it, because a lot of ao dais are made from silk, so it's really fragile fabric, and it's easy for it to get snagged. And that's what happened with Nalia, and that's what happened with Nalia's mom. And I remember being in a critique group, and someone told me, "Oh, you need to make the mom angrier." And I didn't want to, because I know for myself, when my daughter makes a mistake and I look at her face at that age, this is when she was 6, and I know that she's already feeling bad. I don't need to make her feel worse, And so I try to remember what it was like to be that age and be excited to try on your parents' clothes, and sometimes things happen. And I wanted to have it be a teachable moment that she could her mom could share with her that she did the same thing, but there's a way to repair it, and to honor that heritage of to repair things and use them again, and then it's actually more special and beautiful because now there's a little frog on it, and so Nali will always know that that's her frog. So I really felt that was important. And going back to what you asked before about wearing ao dais and whether or not they're comfortable, I wanted to say that when my daughter and I wear ao dais for International Day, I don't know, I feel like we stand taller and we feel really graceful. And so I think there's a beauty to wearing our traditional dresses that makes us really proud when we wear it. Because I also love all the decorative parts of the dress, and people would come up and ask us questions. So it's really a great way for people to engage with us about our culture and for us to be able to share.
And I think that kind of speaks to intergenerational healing, like in a family, but also for the culture, right?
Yes.
I also want to hone in on one of the parts of the Yellow Ao Dai, and this is Philip Nguyen with my co-host Viet Nguyen for Accented Dialogues in Diaspora. We're speaking with the children's book writer Hanh Bui about her book, The Yellow Ao Dai. There is a moment of reconciliation when the mother and daughter share a sniff kiss.
Yes.
Could you speak a little bit more to what is a sniff kiss? Like, what does it mean?
Well, I love sniff kisses because my grandparents did that. Ever since I was little, I was raised by my grandparents, and they would always give us sniff kisses. And even when we came to this country and they were so overwhelmed and busy taking care of everyone, they were never too busy to give us sniff kisses. So I wanted to just really remember that. And my mother-in-law and my father-in-law gave my sons, because my sons got to know them, gave them so many sniff kisses all the time. And I think in Vietnam, it's more often that the grandparents or elders are giving sniff kisses. But in this country, my children actually have learned to give sniff kisses back. So my daughter sniff kisses me all the time. And, so I just remember them, my children sniff kissing me. And I thought, I think a lot of American parents also do that, but they don't realize it's called sniff kisses. Because once I shared it, people reach out to me, and my friends were like, I've been sniff kissing my child, and I didn't even know it was called sniff kisses. And I just thought I really want to share sniff kisses. And I thought, how do I explain sniff kisses? And I feel like it's like we're inhaling the love from our children. And so I wanted to just really, I wanted to encourage the readers to go give sniff kisses to their parents, or to parents to give sniff kisses to their children. So that's why I included that.
It always warms my heart to hear about functional and affectionate Vietnamese families. They're great. Yeah, sniff kisses are great. My wife sniff kisses our children often. I just hug them and smooch them, which they don't always appreciate.
That's a big step, though, from the
Yeah,
the
no,
elder
that's a big
Viet
step.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm dysfunctional completely, but I've done my best to turn myself into a functional and affectionate parent for the sake of my kids. Well, congratulations on the Yellow Ao Dai, Han. And you've already got a new book coming out next year. Can you tell us about it?
So next summer, I have a book coming out with same publisher, with Macmillan, called An's New Word. And it's about my first English word in this country that I learned to speak aloud, and my first teacher. And I've met my first teacher, Miss Mary Lou, at Fort Indiantown Gap. And she was a volunteer there. She was 19 and I was 8 years old. And on the very last day, Miss Mary Lou gave me a photo. And on the back of the photo of herself, it was a little small wallet-sized photo, she had written, Han, I love you, Mary Lou Shada. And that's how we were able to find Miss Mary Lou during the pandemic, because I had written this story and submitted it to my editor. And my editor, we were actually working on the story when we found Miss Mary Lou. And so now my teacher's back in my life. And I still remember the first time I talked to her on the phone. I was so worried that she wouldn't remember me, because there were so many children at the refugee camp and we didn't speak the same language. But even without the language, I knew that Miss Mary Lou cared about me. And when I learned to read English and know what she wrote on the back of the book, not the book, the back of the photo, I was so moved. I couldn't believe my teacher wrote that. And so the first time we talked on the phone, I was able to tell her that I love her too. And it was just really such an amazing full circle moment. And I actually have photos of my teacher holding my first book. And she's going to be a part of the launch for the second book. I'm really excited.
Oh my gosh. And we are too. Anne's new word is going to be published next summer.
Yes.
And we want to thank you, Han, so much for sharing your memories, sharing your functional expressions of love, and sharing your stories with us. You can find The Yellow Ao Yai, published by Macmillan Publishers, illustrated by Minnie Fan at a bookstore near you. It is out and available, so be sure to check out Han's book. And Han, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Accented Dialogues in Diaspora.
Thank you for having me on.
Cool. Thanks, Han. How are you feeling, Viet?
Feeling pretty good.
Feel good. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a nice
I feel like
warm
I've
day.
grown as a human being.
That's
Yeah.
rare. That's rare.
Yeah.
We don't, No, actually, I feel like that every show,
I feel like my heart grew a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just a little, just enough. So we are transitioning into part 2 of our show with Alexandra Huynh. Alexandra Huynh is a 20-year-old Vietnamese American poet from Sacramento, California. She is a 2020 Sacramento Youth Poet Laureate, a program of Sacramento area Youth Speaks. In 2021, Alexandra became the 5th National Youth Poet Laureate of the United States, where she served as a cultural ambassador of the National Youth Poetry community. Please welcome Alexandra Huynh to Accented Dialogues in Diaspora. Welcome, Alexandra.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So we're so glad to have you on. The first question that we want to hit you with, because we know that you are definitely representative of this younger, up and coming Vietnamese American youth generation who is speaking and writing themselves into existence, right? As is the title of tonight's show. As we create reflections of our lived experiences. And the first question that I want to ask you is reflecting on your life so far. Do you have a first memory of when you fell in love with poetry and decided to pursue poetry?
Yeah, I have a lot of memories of loving reading and writing clustered around when I was maybe 7 years old. And I think the first memory of poetry that I usually share with people is the first time that I wrote a song. And when I was in 3rd grade, my mom kindly put me into singing lessons because my friend was taking singing lessons and I wanted to copy her. And I remember at my first lesson, my teacher put this 2-inch large binder in front of me saying, pick a song and we'll sing one of the songs. And after a few weeks, I remember feeling like I couldn't connect with the songs. The experiences they were writing about weren't necessarily written for me. And so I decided that I wanted to write my own song and have that be the song that I sing and record onto a CD, which was my final project for that singing class. And it was a fun time, just like being able to put my emotions into words. After that first song that I wrote, which was not good at all, I decided to continue with songwriting, and I would write songs for class projects or as a way to study for chemistry tests. But it wasn't until my junior year of high school, when I was 16, that I joined my first ever poetry slam. And when I competed in that space for the first time, I just remember feeling very welcomed by all of the people there, and just honestly being surprised by the fact that me simply talking about my life experiences was enough to hold their attention. And I ended up getting 2nd place in the whole city, and I was put onto their slam team, and I just continued doing poetry from there.
So speaking about your experiences, I know it's a loaded question, but can you tell us a little bit more about where you're from?
So I am from Sacramento, California. I'm very lucky in that I grew up with a Vietnamese enclave around me. I went to the same Vietnamese Buddhist temple, Gia Phật tử Kim Quang, for 10 years of my life. And there I took Vietnamese lessons, Buddhist lessons, and I really became one with the cultural calendar of the Vietnamese culture. And so I went to Viet, I had New Year's festivals, and being Vietnamese was always a part of my identity that I was very proud of. And also, I'm really lucky that Sacramento has a very robust and supportive youth arts scene. I didn't tap into it until I was an older high school student, but looking back on it, there were so many opportunities for me to really lean into my identity and make something creative out of it. So yeah.
And you're currently at Stanford University, is that right?
Yes, I am.
And I know in previous interviews, you had talked about being an engineering major going into Stanford University, right? When during your rise to national fame as a youth poet laureate. But I think, can you talk a little bit about how that your trajectory has changed since then?
Yeah, so going into Stanford, I thought that I wanted to be an engineer. Part of that was because I was good at math and science in high school, and my dad and my older brother are also engineers. So I wanted to follow in their footsteps, and I also thought it would be a fun challenge. But when I got to Stanford and I was looking at the 4-year curriculum for the engineering major, I realized that, not surprisingly, I'd be spending the majority of my time doing problem sets. And I didn't want to do that anymore. After becoming the National Youth Poet Laureate, I realized that perhaps writing and literature were things that were worth my time that I could do outside of just a hobbyist context. And so I decided that I was going to become an English major, but I was also going to be pre-med because I still wanted the prestige and challenge of potentially becoming a doctor. But yeah, I think this summer I started to pivot away from that and to let myself lean into the uncertainty of simply being an English major, because I realized that being a doctor, while it's a very noble profession, it's perhaps not aligned with what I want for my own life. I want to have time to spend with my kids because my parents, who worked really hard, didn't necessarily have that option. And yeah, I think moving forward, I'm just trying to keep an open mind and take advantage of the time that I have at Stanford to meet as many people as possible and go down paths that perhaps I never expected I would be exploring.
I'm Viet Nguyen. I'm co-hosting Accented Dialogues in Diaspora with Philip Nguyen, and we're talking with National Youth Poet Laureate Alexandra Huynh. Alex, we've had famous poets who have been doctors, insurance executives, bankers. I'm not sure we've ever had famous poets who are engineers. So in one sense, it would have been awesome if you had continued in engineering and then we would have had an engineer/poet, but that's another reality that we won't have. But I'm kind of curious, since you said your brother and father are engineers, how did your family take the news that you were no longer going to be an engineer or even a doctor and that you were going to be an English and Asian American Studies major?
I think, like many parents, they were a little bit worried, not in the sense that they didn't think I could be successful, but rather, I think they just wanted me to have some sense of stability or to have some sort of certainty around what my path would be. And after a few conversations with them, though, I did see that they were ultimately supportive of my desire to explore and to not be bogged down by things that I knew that I didn't want to do, like being an engineer or a doctor. So overall, I do feel like my family has been supportive, and I appreciate their well-intentioned concern most of the time.
It's interesting. Obviously, the model minority image or stereotype, whatever you want to call it, is that people like you or Asian Americans in general become the doctors and engineers and lawyers and so on. And so that becoming a poet disrupts that. On the other hand, you are the National Youth Poet Laureate. So it's like, oh my God.
National, yeah.
Yeah, okay, you're a poet, but you also become the National Youth Poet Laureate. That just makes everything better in some ways. So I imagine there must be young poets out there saying, well, it's great we have a role model with Alex, but we also have to be the National Youth Poet Laureate now, even more pressure in that model minority way. Do you feel any of that? Because obviously the role of National Youth Poet Laureate became very visible with Amanda Gordon and her performance at the inauguration. So that legacy, and then, just a very title, is that a burden or is that an opportunity, or both for you?
I would say both. I certainly had big shoes to fill going into the position, because prior to that, the National Youth Poet Laureate was still a recognized and important position, but it wasn't nearly as visible as it was once Amanda Gorman performed her inaugural poem, as you mentioned. So I think when I had applied, that had not happened yet. That was like the November before President Biden's inauguration. And I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, honestly. I just thought that I had been taking a gap year before college at that time. So I knew that I had some more time on my hands, and I wanted to see what might happen if I gave myself a chance to be a part of this competition. And then I became a finalist, and then I ended up winning. And that was the most terrifying day of my life. Well, maybe one of them, that's hyperbole, but it was really challenging in the sense that I have never been the kind of person who naturally, feels at home in the spotlight. And as the National Youth Poet Laureate, I'm not only called on to share poetry, which is already a very vulnerable medium, I also had to talk about myself constantly. I had to give interviews and tell people who I am, in quotation marks. And that was hard to navigate, because at the time, I think I was just turning 18. So it was a lot to deal with. And I also wanted to navigate the pressures of, learning how to say yes and no to the right things. I was surprised by the amount of requests that I got, and I was incredibly lucky to get those requests. But I didn't know at that time I didn't know that I could say no, basically. As someone who was an ambassador for the young community, I felt that if I did turn away an opportunity to talk about what poetry has done for me, that I might be failing someone in some way. But on the flip side of things, being the National Youth Poet Laureate has opened up so many doors for me. And perhaps most tangibly, it's given me the opportunity to take my mom to places she wouldn't otherwise have the chance to travel to. Whenever I get bookings for an event across the country, I always ask the organizers if there's room in their budget to take my mom with me. And mostly they say yes. And if not, we figure out a way. But I have just loved being able to share these experiences with my mom, because I don't think she ever expected that one of her children would have such a large platform. And her father, my grandfather, was also a poet, which is something that I didn't find out until after I started writing poetry. So it is a very full circle moment in that way.
I want to pursue that further, because I also didn't know about your grandfather being a poet. And obviously, in Vietnam, where your family is from, there's a long tradition of the importance of literature to the culture, which is coming from a very different cultural and political context, because back in the day, poetry and literature were the route to power. People had to study, men had to study these types of things in order to pass the Mandarin exam, and then they would become the administrators and the rulers of Vietnam. Here in the United States, obviously, no one really, well, I won't say no one, but there's less emphasis given to poetry and literature as worldly kind of pursuits, right? That's why engineering and law and medicine have replaced poetry for so many Vietnamese Americans. But what can you tell us about your grandfather and his life as a poet? And who was he? Do you know his name?
That's a good question. I knew his name at some point, perhaps for confidentiality purposes. I'll just say that he's my Ngoại. But in terms of his life, he was a poet, of course. He was also a father to my mom, and he was also put into a re-education camp during the Vietnam War. And I know that took a huge toll on my mom. But at the end of 10 years in the re-education camp, my mom's family was able to get the chance to be sponsored to come to the United States. And at that point, I think before he was imprisoned, he had published maybe 1 or 2 books in Vietnamese poetry. And the last book he ever published was the year that I was born and also the year that he died. So I still have a copy of that book sitting on my shelf in my childhood bedroom, and I hope to one day be able to read it and translate it. Vietnamese was my first language, but I lost it for the most part when I went to public school. And I hope to be able to bring his work into a larger reading sphere. I remember sitting with my mom once in high school and trying to like translate one of his poems line by line. And it was so rich in imagery, and it was also very hard to understand. The messages were entrenched in metaphor. And I think that's something that's really fascinating about perhaps the difference between the Vietnamese poetry that I've encountered and the poetry that I write. I think slam poetry in particular can feel a lot more explicit and explicitly political as well. So yeah, it's just fascinating to be able to see how my grandfather navigated that medium given his political context.
And thanks for sharing the living, like you as the living legacy of your grandfather here with us for Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, as we're talking with Alexandra Huynh about how she writes herself into existence. Alex, we also would want to ask you if you wouldn't mind sharing one of your pieces with our audience for tonight.
Yeah, of course. So this poem is inspired by a conversation that my mom had with me and my twin sister on our 18th birthday. She had taken us out for lunch, and I don't know if you've had this experience, but sometimes my parents will just share the most intense and heartbreaking story out of the blue, sometimes on very special occasions, and it is a lot to process, and this was a way for me to process that moment. I think so that I could tell my mom in a way that what she's been through was hard, and that the fact that she's survived it is something to celebrate too. My mother takes us to lunch. He cried the first time he saw us. 3 months seem like God work when the only timekeepers you trust are the pockmarks on your body. Meanwhile, the house had been cleaved to fit another family, and the books burned for propriety. We sold peanuts now. It was Saturday when we took a bus ride guided by strangers' memories and strange men to find the re-education camp, tucked into the countryside where our city mouths became like fish swimming in sand. Such was the dust that settled over the palm-thatched roofs and behind our ears, giving everything a quality of disuse. Men who could no longer work lay shelved on straw mats, and everywhere desperation hung like silk. I held out a parcel of sticky rice tied with my small hands, and he held onto my shoulders like a headstone. Carved his name in kisses on my skinny body, so if he never came home, I would wear his memory. And so I've accomplished relatively little, says my mother, as she retires her silverware onto the porcelain plate and opens her face in a projector smile that lands on her 2 daughters who have made it to adulthood this very day, which means it has been nearly 2 decades since my grandfather passed in this country he and my mother's mother came to after 10 years imprisoned, and this knowledge lights up the corner booth of the little cafe on the good side of town, where the only people with dark hair wear aprons, and then there's us, who have the privilege of not having to stay.
Just gonna snap it up real quick. No, I really, what you said really speaks deeply to me too. Kind of seemingly randomly during these momentous occasions, my parents will also be the first ones to bring up like a completely heartbreaking, heart-wrenching story that like no one would have like made a tangential connection to. One of the things that stuck out to me in the piece that you just read, and this is Philip Nguyen, co-host of Accented Dialogues in Diaspora here with Viet, Thanh, Nguyen, speaking with Alexandra Huynh, is that your grandfather was 10 years imprisoned in what I assume was a re-education camp. Can you talk a little bit about how being a descendant of refugees has influenced who you are, your life trajectory, but also informed your work and writing?
Absolutely. I think that this question is something I'm still figuring out because growing up, the writing classes that I was in, or rather the English classes I was in, didn't necessarily give me permission to use my lived experiences as an archive and as a portal to learn about larger issues such as like the refugee experience or the experience of Vietnamese immigrants. And I think maybe on the most tangible level, being the daughter of refugees has taught me a lot about family and sacrifice. Growing up, I feel that I had a very distant relationship with my parents because I didn't get to spend a lot of time with them, but I was extremely close with my siblings. And I was able to build my first sense of community with them. And I'm really grateful to my parents for putting me into after school programs and putting me, enrolling me into the Vietnamese Buddhist temple nearby our house, because that was where I was able to really flesh out my identity as a second generation Vietnamese American with other people who were experiencing the same exact thing. And in terms of how this identity impacts my art, I feel like I'm trying to write about being Vietnamese without necessarily having that be the first selling point, if that makes sense. As a Vietnamese American poet, there are not a lot of us, but the number is growing, which is great. Sometimes I feel the pressure to write into a certain narrative. And Viet, when you came to talk at Stanford, you're talking about like the importance of having like multiple narratives within the Asian American diaspora. And that resonated with me so much because I felt the need to write about how I was somehow abandoning the oppressive household that my parents were upholding as Vietnamese immigrants. And sure, there are aspects of the Vietnamese community that are, things that I think we need to have critical conversations about, but I think that should never be disregarded for the joy and resilience that has also been ingrained into us through the experience of being Vietnamese American. So yeah, I guess as a writer, I just want to be a writer that is also Vietnamese American in the same way that white writers just get to be writers who also happen to be white, if that makes sense.
The poem that you read, which is a beautiful poem, by the way, and something I never could have written when I was your age. So congrats for that. I realized at an early age I was a terrible poet, so I just spared the world my poetry. But it obviously evoked, I think, some of these narratives that people would associate with being Vietnamese, like the re-education camp, for example, and the generational transmission of knowledge from your mother to you and your siblings. But it's also different because it is, in fact, about someone who's younger, someone who's processing this information from a very different perspective. And I think you're absolutely right in the kind of balance that you're trying to strike between both acknowledging Vietnamese ancestry, history, parental concerns, and all of that, but also being free to write about many other kinds of things as well. So you mentioned earlier, for example, that slam poetry is different than your grandfather's poetry because slam poetry, at least your version of it, has these political connotations. I'm interested in that. Like, what are some of the political things that your poetry deals with?
Yeah, so I think when I first started writing slam poetry, that was when I was 16, and the topics that I wrote about included education and climate change, as well as just things that I noticed in my community, for example, like our inability to talk about homelessness in Sacramento. And for me, slam poetry has always been a great medium to talk about political issues because it feels as if the focus is not just on the words themselves, but also the feeling that those words invoke. And you can trace the, I guess, the energy of the room as you're reading the poem, because it is a very communal experience. Like when people resonate with what you've said, they'll snap, or they'll shout, or they'll say or go in, poet. And it's really amazing to be in a space where you feel like you have the agency and the power to just tell your own story, and people will listen, people will care. Yep, people will say pop off queen as well. And so for me, that's what slam poetry has allowed me. But I think something I want to bring up is that oftentimes people have the conception that slam poets are loud and angry and they like to shout. But that is not at all my mode of slamming. I think I have, naturally always been a very soft-spoken person. And when it came to competitions, that soft nature was actually an advantage for me. It helped me stand out from the other poets because I was able to say things that were just as impactful without having to raise my voice. And in that way, I think slam is a space where you can really show up as yourself and still succeed. So.
Slam poetry has all these connotations that you just mentioned, especially the performative part, whatever the performance is, right? Mm-hmm. And it's rather different than what we might call high poetry or canonical poetry or literary poetry, which is meant much more to be on the page first and foremost. And I've been to many poetry readings. They're oftentimes very boring. And I've had a very canonical education from high school on through college, which includes, deep immersion into the whole history of English and American poetry and all of that, which in some ways for me was very powerful, because when I was 16 years old, I was deeply inspired by the Romantic and Victorian poets, for example. But by the time I got to college, it became increasingly stultifying, especially the way poetry was being taught in universities, or at least the university classes that I attended. And you're going to Stanford, I'm sure, as an English major, you're taking some very elite and challenging literary courses. What's the contrast for you between slam poetry, this medium that you love, and the way that poetry might be being taught in your experience?
That's a really good question. I feel like the way that poetry is taught in the canonical sense, maybe to speak to my own classes at Stanford, obviously our goal is, in the English major, our goal is to learn as much about Anglophone, quote unquote Anglophone work, which means work that's been written in the English language. And oftentimes there's a lot of emphasis on old white dead men poets. But I've been really encouraged by the smaller workshop classes that I've taken, particularly with poets of color, lecturers of color, who really prioritize centering stories from marginalized communities. And what I love about slam poetry is that it feels like a space where your story doesn't have to be vetted or validated by any sort of, outside committee before you get to perform that poem. And really, you could talk about any issue, big or small, that you want. And oftentimes it allows you a sense of nuance, and it jolts you into listening to people, right? Like you have 3 minutes on the stage, but the rest of that hour or hour and a half, you have to listen to people, and you're actively participating in it, and you feel their stories in your body. And that's what I love about slam poetry. You don't get to escape from the page. You have to experience the pain or the joy of the person on stage, which I think is what's so transformative about poetry for me, and partially why I really believed in the role of the National Youth Poet Laureate. Because when you move from reading poetry that's written to poetry out loud, I think that's when you can really start to move people.
On the question of moving people, you'd mentioned earlier vulnerability. And to me, that seems to be one of the most crucial elements of being a writer, whether one's a poet or a fiction writer or a memoirist, is to be able to confront one's own vulnerability, either in private and you write it down and it's on the page and then people can look at it separately, or in your case, actually being vulnerable on stage, performing. That's terrifying for a lot of people, I think. Was it terrifying for you to know that, number one, if you're writing these things down, people might read it one day, or terrifying to be up on stage sharing something which I assume would be exposing some part of you that you had to work through?
Yeah, I think I've always deeply appreciated the anonymity that writing has allowed me, just because mostly when I write, I'm writing alone and I have the chance to process those feelings without the gaze of other people. And when it comes to performing on stage, surprisingly, I don't feel as nervous about it as one might expect. Part of that is because I played classical piano for 5 years and I hated piano recitals. And when you're nervous and you're playing piano, it shows, like, you're messing up keys. But when you're nervous and you're performing a poem, you can just channel that, vibrato into your voice and pretend like you're about to cry, and people will be like, oh my God, she's so emotional right now. So yeah, the performance aspect is a little more flexible in that sense. But I think what's scariest for me is not performing in front of a crowd of strangers, but in front of people I know, in particular, performing in front of the people that I wrote the poem about. Poetry is like very personal and archival, and I am still working through how I think about sharing work with people when they have inspired it, because most of the time that work does come from a place of like darkness and hurt. So yeah, that's probably the scariest part of performing, is perhaps realizing that the people that inspired the work are going to be in the audience, because the real work is having those follow-up conversations with them and not just turning the pain into art, but actually, having some sort of good come out of it that will last for a long time.
Has performing, has doing poetry, has being a poet, becoming a poet, improved the relationship that you have with your parents and your family?
I think in a surprising way, it has. I have been really heartened by how supportive my parents have been of my poetry journey. At first, I didn't really tell them about it. I would just have my mom drive me to like random poetry slams. And then only when we got to the slam would she know what was happening. And I didn't tell my dad that I really did poetry seriously until I had become a finalist for the National Youth Poet Laureate. So outside of their concerns for like my safety as someone who was going to be in the public's eye a little bit more, they were extremely supportive, and they just want to get to know me as an artist. I can't say that I fully reciprocate by sharing everything that I write with them, but they always are there to cheer for me, even when I'm afraid that the work that I'm performing will upset them or will challenge their own beliefs.
This is Philip Nguyen. I'm here with my co-host Viet, Thanh, Nguyen for Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, presented by the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network. We are speaking with the 2021 National Youth Poet Laureate Alexandra Huynh on this episode of Accented, titled Writing Myself into Existence, Creating Reflections of Our Lived Experiences. Alex, it's been such a pleasure to have you on Accented. One of my closing questions that I've got for you as we segue out is, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to a younger version of yourself, perhaps the one that graduated from college, not knowing what lied ahead of her at Stanford in English and Asian American studies, and that she would switch from engineering to the arts?
I think I would tell myself to accept the fact that I will be changing a lot and that my interests will change, and that's okay. And to also know that I will always, to some extent, feel like I don't deserve the attention or the resources that I have, but that doesn't mean that I can't put them to good use. So really lean into community and ask people for help when you need it, because you can't be the face of anything alone. And even when you are, know that that's just an illusion. and people will forget about you eventually. So don't be afraid to embarrass yourself too bad.
Thanks, Alex, for joining us on Accented. And for all of our listeners in the audience, see y'all next time.
All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. How could I call anything stone? And why would I believe that we can ever be alone? How are you even here? Tell me, how'd I steal your ear? Was it pain? Was it fun? Was it something I had yet to perceive? All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. God in a dream several times, but always in a dark room. No words, no sound except breath, something greater than me. And if I ever woke, I'd turn the story to a song or a joke. Did I listen for a heart? Did I embrace any soul? All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light. All colors of the night, turn every darkness into light.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, DJ Puzzle. That was awesome. I love that song. Can we have our two guests back, Alex and Han? Now, this is the informal part. There are no restrictions on anything we can say, do, or anything like that.
Y'all were amazing. That was so deep.
Right.
Like,
you know, there's probably no obscenities in children's literature, but slam poetry is a completely different.
The
Anyway, it's awesome. I think, I was really glad to have both of you here with us because, part of the mission of Accented is to show people, Vietnamese people, other Southeast Asians, non-Vietnamese people, that these artistic careers or, callings are a real possibility. Everything from children's books, and there's, very few people know how to become a children's book writer, but then with also poetry as well. I think that, I think it's awesome that we had Alex on as, I don't know if you're a teenager still or 20 or 21, but, as a relatively young person, living the dream of being a poet, right? Which is fantastic. I don't think I had those kinds of role models when I was 18 and a terrible poet, to encourage me. So that's really great. I think we do have some questions, Philip, from the Q&A. Do you want to pick one?
Yeah, we can have Q&A. Yes. Let's see, which one should we go with? This maybe I'll go with this first one from TT Tran, who asks for Viet and Alex. How do you feel being in the same space with each other, each of you, an accoladed writer and poet on your own, and for Han, Viet, and Alex, how often do you think about the purpose of your work and what would be the answers to that resolve? So Viet and Alex, how do y'all feel being in the similar
like
space?
I said, like Alex is writing poetry that's awesome, and when I was her age, I was writing still horrible rhymed romantic poetry, sentimental, sappy kinds of stuff, and so I feel like totally inadequate, honestly, because it's like I was a late bloomer. I didn't write anything worthwhile until I was in my 30s, to be honest. I mean, Maxine on Kingston told me I was the worst student in her writing class when I was 19 years old. So in no ways was I, as talented as Alex is at the present moment. So I feel humbled being in her presence. And, Han also as well, like, I think it takes actually a certain kind of maturity to be a children's book writer and to have a certain kind of wisdom. I never could have written a children's book until being a parent myself. That book I talked about when I was 8 years old was called Lester the Cat. And ever since I gave it to my then girlfriend, who became my ex-girlfriend, when she dumped me, she took that book with her. So I will, never be able to see what potential I had when I was 8 years old, but I doubt that it was very much. So, I think we have two people here who are doing incredible work, and I'm honored to be here with the both of them.
Oh my goodness. I feel honored to be here. Viet, I first heard about your work in high school when we were talking about Pulitzer Prize winning authors, and it's just insane to be in the same Zoom space as you. Yeah, you are incredible. And I followed you on Instagram for a long time now. So just to go from reading your captions and posts to having a conversation with you in real time on your show with Philip and Han as well has just been a joy. And I told my sister about this. She's fangirling too. And I'm also just excited to be here with Han. I have a dream of being a children's book author and teacher as well. So yeah, it's been wonderful to hear about how your work has been motivated by your personal history and to see the warmth that you exude when you talk about your motivations.
Thank you. I was just, Alex, when I was listening to you speak, I was just so blown away by what you had to share, and your maturity, but also your wisdom. Like Viet, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe the poetry that I'm hearing from you, but also just your conversation about your connection with your family and celebrating your culture and your connection to your family history and how you're honoring that. I was just so impressed with that. And Viet, my son is such a big fan. So my eldest, today's his birthday, and he was really excited. So when I told Justin that I was gonna have this conversation with you on his birthday, he was really, really, I think I became cooler in my son's eyes because I was having a conversation with you. But excuse me?
How old is he?
He's turning 26 today.
Oh, 26. Awesome.
Yeah. So he was 25, turned 26 today. His name's Justin. And he's an engineer. So yeah. So I just wanted to tell you that my son was just really excited that I was going to be on with you today. And I just stepped out and took a little break and talked to my husband. I said it, and he said, how were things going? And I just want to tell you, I was a little nervous at first, but this is so joyful. And I'm learning so much from all three of you. And it's been such a wonderful space to be a part of. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And I think one connection between the two of you, from what I've understood, is, writing children's books is a lot like poetry, because you don't have thousands of words or, hundreds of pages. You might be a couple hundred words, 300 words.
Yeah, between 500 and about maybe 900 words. But some of those stories are inspired by my lived truths, like my refugee stories may require a little bit of a longer manuscript. So, but I write both in prose and verse. So some of my picture books are actually in prose, like the Yellow Eye, but then I have ones written in verse as well. And so they do take, it takes a lot of revisions, and people think, I don't even tell my family anymore how long it takes, because they're just like, you wrote a picture book, how come it's not ready yet? And I'm like, it takes between 18 months and 2 years for one picture book to come out, because you have to leave time and space for the artists to do their work. And so I really have grown to appreciate every single picture book I buy. And Alex, I want to say thank you for the work that you're doing, because I'm so grateful that my daughter is going to be able to hear you speak and learn from you and have you as a role model. So I really appreciate that so much. You're inspiring a whole generation, because my daughter's also a writer. She's 13, but she loves writing poetry. And so I can't wait for her to hear more of your work.
Well, the problem is that poets often write about their families.
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh.
Could I ask y'all about your family? So Alex, you mentioned you have a twin sister, and Han, we know that you have at least 2 children.
I have 3.
So what is your 3 children? Okay. 26, 13, and the third is?
And my middle son is 18.
18. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And then Alex, you have a twin sister out there. Does she ever pretend to be you on stage or when you're speaking at city council or anything like that?
Oh, we're actually fraternals, so that would be really difficult. But people thought we were cousins growing up, because we were just in like different social spaces. She's very popular, captain of 3 sports, vice president, and I was a bookworm. And so we didn't have overlapping friend groups, and they thought that we were just like cousins that carpooled to school. I also have an older brother and a younger brother.
Oh wow, it's both big families like joining together is really beautiful. And Viet, your siblings are evoked often on Accented, but I think it's kind of seeing one of the things that I noticed about both of your, like when both of you were sharing, was that you both evoked your grandparents into what you were sharing, and I thought that was particularly beautiful. Like the second part of the question from TT is, how often do you think about the purpose of your work and what would be the answer to that result? But I also want to wonder, do y'all think about legacy often? Like either what was passed on to you or what you're passing on to the future? I'll see you first, Alex.
Okay, thank you. I think I do think about legacy, maybe more immediately with my own parents, because they've been really generous in sharing their personal histories of what it was like to be a refugee and to adapt to being in America, and basically, telling me how they made a life for themselves, which has made a lot of my material challenges seem very small. And returning to those stories has been very grounding when I feel like I just can't keep going. But in terms of a connection with my grandparents, I think that's a lot more of an ephemeral thing, just because I only have one more living grandparent, and I didn't have the chance to become close to the other grandparents that I have had in my life. So I would like to learn more about them, which is probably a project for, a later time through talking with my parents. And then also to address that question of the purpose of my work, I feel strongly that poetry can start conversations and it can also provide comfort, but that the problems that often catalyze my poetry can't be solved by poetry alone, which is why I don't think I could ever be a poet as a profession. I have to be poet / something else, just because if I was sitting around writing about problems all the time, I think I would just feel very stagnant. Like I have to do something to address those problems. And yes, that's something I'm trying to figure out now. What can I do with an English degree? We'll see, but maybe I'll go to graduate school. Maybe I'll become a teacher. Yeah, that's kind of how I keep my purpose in alignment with my values.
Well, by the time you are graduating, maybe DVAN will have a staff position for you.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Right, because Asian American Studies minor or major is also obviously very useful for community work, nonprofit work, these kinds of things. Hey, Vin has a question. I think it's kind of relevant. I mean, the question would also apply for children's book writing or other kinds of writing as well.
Yeah, on community, Vin Tan asks, are there online groups for Viet or Asian American poetry or children's book writers / poets, authors? I love poetry, but my Viet reading is grade school level. The Viet poetry that I found with its intended English translations are so beautiful. I want to find more and connect with others with that shared interest experience. Have y'all been able to? Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people reach out to me through social media to share with me different groups that they've established. There's a group of moms, but also there's influencers and also booksellers in different parts of the country and the world that carry Asian American stories. And so I've had a lot of people reach out to me, sharing with me how this has really been something they've been looking forward to sharing with their children about our Vietnamese culture and learning about the fan dance and our yais, and that they hadn't seen a book like that. And so I think there's definitely a lot of groups like that. But as far as for children's writers, we have the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. There's highlights, but there's also a lot of conferences and events that we can go to, as far as festivals that we can connect. I know Viet had mentioned there's going to be one in October, so there's a lot of opportunities for us to connect and meet with other children's book authors. And I think community is very important. Just like Alex said, as far as what she's doing, it's really hard to do it in isolation. I definitely feel because being a writer, you have to be open to a lot of rejections, and having your community of friends who actually understand the process helps a lot as far as lifting you up when you need it. And we support one another. So while we're waiting for our stories to happen, we keep writing more stories. And I wanted to also address what Philip was saying about purpose. For me, it's really important I feel like I want to live my purpose every day. And my purpose is to inspire kindness, and also to show that our stories are universal. The themes of our stories are universal. I want our stories to be family stories. They don't have to be just for AAPI month. I want our stories to be on bookshelves along other family stories. And I want children to be able to see themselves in the books that we write. And I know that the change that we need needs to start at a young age. And that's why I wanted to write for children. And I experienced the same thing with, some concerns and pushback about our narratives being a little complicated with the Vietnam War. And as far as writing refugee stories inspired by my refugee experiences. And when I went to a school visit recently, all the children were actually so interested in little me, because I had a slideshow, and there was a picture of me at the refugee camp, and it was the only photo I had. And they all wanted to know about little Han and how I got on the ship and how I came to this country. And that was so reassuring, because I know that children can handle it. I know that children want to know our stories, and they want to know our truth. And so that was just so reassuring to me to be able to share with them in a way that was appropriate, and they're just full of compassion. And so I'm hoping that what Alex is doing, what I'm doing, will help to break some of the barriers and help to just show that our stories are meant for everyone.
And Alex?
On my end, I wish that I had a better answer about resources for Asian American writers. I do know that there is the Asian American Writers Workshop, and they have programming and fellowships that you can apply for. And in terms of working groups for reading Vietnamese poetry, especially if you have a lower reading level, I'm also at grade school level. I don't know of any that exist yet, but if you want to create one, I will happily join you and rally people from Stanford as well. Maybe the only other piece of advice that I could give is my mom took me to this bookstore in the Little Saigon area of San Jose, and they had these like books with Vietnamese stories on one side and the English translation on the other. So perhaps there are poetry versions of those books that might be helpful out there in the world.
And I think also a lot of churches offer Vietnamese classes. So I know that might be a good resource. Like there's a lot of Vietnamese churches that offer Vietnamese classes for children and adults.
Nowadays, with the internet, you can actually just go online and find Vietnamese language instructors in Vietnam who are doing it online.
Wow.
So, I mean, things have changed drastically since I had to physically go to Vietnam to study Vietnamese. That's a huge difference. But, DVAN also occasionally does online writing workshops as well. So keep an eye out on the DVAN website for that information.
Yeah, y'all are part of the Accented family now. So
We're honored.
TT Chan has one more question. How do y'all remember to serve the people you set out to serve in the first place once you're on your way to success, or maybe not to where you came from? I want to pitch this question first to Viet, whose memoir, A Man of Two Faces, A Memoir, A History, A Memorial, is coming out October 3rd, 2023.
Wow.
What's it like to look back on your entire life?
Oh, right. Here it is. I didn't keep it here just to display it to you, but I've lived, these are the advanced reading copy. And so up until last week, I was still doing page proofs on this thing, reading it until I'm just sick and tired of this book. When you're done with a book, when you're sick and tired of reading it over and over and over again. So, this is a memoir, a history, a memorial. It looks thick, but it's actually really easy to read from what everybody's been telling me. And it deals, with some of the things that Alex brought up in terms of what her mom told her. I mean, that kind of stuff happened to me all the time. Just sitting at dinner and then, hey, the famine killed 1 million people. I was like, oh, okay. Or, hey, just be lucky we're not still in Vietnam. You would be in Cambodia as a soldier, a bộ đội, and you'd be probably getting blown up by a landmine. Thank you, Mom and Dad. So all these kinds of stories are in there, but a lot of jokes too. For a writer, sometimes it takes us decades to process the kinds of things that we are dealing with emotionally, whether these are things transmitted to us from other people, whether they're things that we go through ourselves. And so I'm not sure if this is an exact answer to TT's question, but the purpose of the work that TT is asking about, I always felt that the purpose of the work is to serve your own ideas of truth and beauty, whatever those happen to be. Those are very highly subjective terms, but I grew up in this Vietnamese refugee community, and in some ways it was a very ugly experience, as I think anyone who has grown up in a Vietnamese refugee community can testify to. But there are also moments of great beauty, from ao dais to familial love and sniff kisses to community and things like this, and all of that is represented in this book. So telling the truth can be a very difficult thing when the truth involves not just beauty, but also ugliness as well. And so that's why sometimes it takes decades to serve that kind of purpose. So anyway, that's my answer. That'll come out in October. Philip, was there anything else for our guests?
Our guests, when you got no ingredients at home, your go-to no ingredient at home meal, what is it? And what does it consist of? Mine is rice, of course, with spam. We would call it square at home, and jung, or eggs.
Yeah. And for me, my daughter always jokes with me and says, Mom, because I always tell her, as long as I have 2 eggs and some soy sauce and some steamed rice, I have a meal. Because my grandmother always says 2 eggs make a meal. And so I feel like as long as I have 2 eggs I can always whip up a meal for us. And we would cut some cucumbers or, some vegetables for the side. And so as long as I have eggs in the fridge, I'll be able to make something.
Feel the same. Probably eggs, rice, and napshung.
Kind of a tricky question, Philip, because you said no ingredients, and obviously ingredients.
Like the bare minimum,
Bare
like
minimum.
what's in the cabinet.
Okay, so what is the bare minimum? For me, it would be Nongshim instant noodles, which I assume everyone has.
You gotta watch your sodium. We need you for the future show.
Hey, you said this is you didn't say anything about being healthy. Okay, so Nongshim instant noodles. If you have canned chicken broth, put that in. Drop an egg or two in there. I also always keep in storage frozen Trader Joe's shrimp, which I can drop in there as well. There you have it.
We all use the eggs.
Eggs.
Thank you all. Thanks to all the folks that are watching this later and all the folks that joined the Zoom tonight for another episode of Accented. We are closing out. We'll take one last screenshot and then we will see you next month for our next
Go Bears!
Episode. Also go Bears.
Go trees.
Oh my gosh. DJ Puzzle, does you
has a rallying cry, do they?
They say go card, which is short for Cardinals, but that's just a color. Our mascot is a tree, not Cardinals, the bird. So
yeah, go Bears. Go Bears.
Yeah. Go Bears.